It's just starting.
Excellent. Right, Thursday afternoon. Welcome everybody. We are looking at working with athletes during COVID-19. I am Andy Lane, a professor of sports psych at the University of Wolverhampton. Twitter handle at AndyLane27 if you want to contact me. Next hour, we're going to be looking at the very issue I talked about, working with athletes. I'm very thankful for BASES for inviting me. I've been a member of BASES for 20 odd years and fellow of the organisation. And these are a great series to put on. And I think it's a great thing that we can do this on a Thursday afternoon. So I hope it's going to be enjoyable. Let's start our discussion overview. Sort of the headlines at the start, and I'll fill in as we go during. COVID is a massive seismic crisis that has changed our daily and our life goals, and so some psychological responses are inevitable, whether they're positive or negative to some degree. They are inevitable. The size of that shift makes a massive change. As part of the early response, so in my early response as a practitioner, as a human and a person around this issue, awareness of what's going on is we need to get some guidelines. We need to get some work around this to help people with their emotions, with their mood. And with Tig McIntyre's group, we've done some guidelines which bring in green exercise. We'll be talking about that later because I think that's really useful to working with athletes. Negative mood, which I've done a great deal of research about. It's kind of why I thought I would put myself forward to do this. Is a likely response, and therefore mood management strategies should be encouraged and understanding about that. And then so understanding what can work for you, how your mood can influence others is a worthwhile. And we are going to look at some of the primary candidates that we're going to have some work on. So the beginnings of all this. It's amazing where we are at now as we turned over to 2020. We'd have never thought that we'd be in this position right now. This is so different to anything we've experienced ever before. This virus has spread. Thousands of people have died. It's right around the world. It's rapid. The rate of spread is enormous. It's a devastating disease. The advice is social and physical distancing. We heard that, to try and reduce and to keep death rate as low as possible. There's a huge effect on sport. And the athletes, we work with athletes, and interestingly, exercise has been elevated as one of the best strategies to help people with mood. But if you're an athlete where you're goal oriented around getting in Olympics or performing achieving goals, winning races, and so on and so forth, you require those events to be put on, and there's a massive, great uncertainty. March the 11th, 52,000 at the Liverpool game. March the 24th, the Olympics eventually postponed. There's a big gap. There's a huge, great degree of uncertainty around athletes as things start closing down about how they're going to cope, how they're going to train, whether the Olympics will going on, whether sport will be continuing, and so on and so forth. And that's uncertain. It's certain for everyone involved. Hayley Carruthers did this. I mean, not going to flip up, but this really interesting audio video diary or reflection to the challenges she faced as we went into lockdown and this period unfolding, waiting for the London Marathon to be postponed again quite late. The Olympic hopes of trying to run in that marathon and the training, and then as social distancing comes in, how the nature of that run, just simply going for a run, has changed because people are almost not approving of someone running quite quickly at them within this environment. And it's different. The notice, and she described it quite nicely about the uncertainty of the situation and how that made it difficult for an athlete who was previously focused, goal-oriented, achieving X time, going for qualification, was so affected so dramatically, and how that affected. So again, in terms of why I thought we need to have something like this, it was around those sorts of thoughts that practitioners need to be on the front foot to help themselves and to help some of their athletes. So initially, what are the first challenges? And we're all experts at this now. We all go online. All my academic colleagues are now, they are Microsoft Teams wonders. They can use Skype, Google Hangout, Zoom, all of those things. And we can communicate, we can still practice, we can go online. And once we've broken down the barriers, which were largely perceptual, that you couldn't do this, and it'd be actually, yes, you can talk to people online. People are speaking to their friends and family online. I think, from my own personal experience, is probably more so because we're now quite conscious and deliberate in our attempts to keep supporting each other socially, and that is quite useful. And we'll come on to some of that later. Training, of course, can be observed. You can still have face-to-face sessions. Training observed by athletes to video their training sessions. Some of the boxers I've been working with have been sending me videos of their training around and how their mental preparation has tried to help them make behavioural shifts in terms of what their performance is doing. In other words, the sort of things I could have done if I was there, but we've negotiated a way of making that work at distance. And so what has happened is online has allowed us to interact and work together in a way that has facilitated some of the things we wanted to do. Me giving feedback around some of the actions and some of the strategies we put in to help performance, and just doing so online. And so it wasn't the doom and gloom thing that was at the start. As a practitioner, as we're going into this, we need to know about the pandemic. I suspect most of us paid some attention to do this, but we thought this would be like some of the other things that went around the media, in that it's likely to be happening to other people and probably won't close down the UK as it did. And when the reality hits that it is going to, well, we're all good practitioners. We look to evidence. What are the psychological impacts of something similar? Quarantine, and there is the list of the sort of things we've got: emotional disturbance, depression, stress, difficulty sleeping, mood. These are all negative things. We, as a practitioner, we need to know about COVID. We want to be informed by practice. Mass social isolation is likely to result in mental health issues. I mean, prison is a punishment. And people are being put into the environments are quite nice, but people will outwardly say, it doesn't matter how many videos you watch, you want to get out and go to nice places, you want to go and talk to people. That sense of enclosure, that sense of lack of choice to what you can and can't do, creates a sense that you're in prison to some degree. Brooks, again, there's a nice work that come on this, talked of several factors that can mitigate the negative effects. I think this is a nice one to start with: protecting personal liberty and agency. That inner belief that you can operate positively in this environment. How can I keep my mindset, keep my physical self positive in this environment? What actions do I need to take? How confident can I deliver those actions? Comes out through the talk. Things like we get some of the other suggestions. Minimizing the length of the quarantine. We started a bit of easing off at the moment in the UK, but then the next point, clear communication, throws that, because the communication is somewhat open to interpretation and people doing their own things, and that can lead to a sense of uncertainty. And of course, essential supplies. We all remember the run on the toilet rolls at the start. I didn't realise that everyone ate so much pasta. But if there's a panic around that, you're not going to get the compliance around the actions. We've got to know, as practitioners, about how this, if you want to be confident of you not getting it, if you want to be confident that your athlete can train, that they won't be able to train if they're worried about catching the virus. Being worried is quite a good thing, because it helps prompt the behaviours you need to do from one perspective. But you need to know about how the virus is transmitted. Certainly, you get something like this thrown at you, and then you've got runners where 2 meter gap is the suggested one. If you're running behind someone and you're running at faster than 2 meters, faster than you're running fast enough, you hit their air straight away, don't you? You hit their air straight away. So the idea of running side to side, running on your own, but is vitally important. Whether there are guidelines or not, you take action around what keeps you safe and what keeps others safe. But then you start understanding how this is transmitted, and therefore you've got to then work out what the behaviours needed in order to be able to be safe. Meech's work and us on the government advisory group. Meech's done some really nice work with a colleague of mine at Sheffield, Tom Webb, around implementation intentions. So on seeing that work, it was something an author I recognised. Being a sports psychologist, you don't always recognise the authors from general psychology that well, and followed her work quite closely. So, and she spoke at a BASIS conference as well, of course. The guidance needs to be written in behaviourally specific. What do people need to do? What do people need to do, and what and have that specified and spelt out really, really clearly. The idea that you have to have capability, motivation, opportunity, they're the factors that predict that. And we unpack that in the next slide. And that there is the physical capability that feeds in there. Can I do this? The motivation and reflective motivation, reflecting on your previous actions, the choices you make, and then the physical opportunity and social opportunity. Connected to that point with running, is there social disapproval of you being out running and people having to move away from you, or out exercising, people having to move away from you? How do they respond to that? How do you interpret that? And how does that change your mindset? All throws into a different mindset that informs what you're doing, and makes it different. Understanding these models make it quite helpful in terms of where you're going to, and make sense then of sticking in strategies to be able to follow these guidelines. But the first one is you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to be so that you can be helpful in helping others, and that's really quite important. So you've got to internalize that. So around that, you've got to be, as a psychologist, helps to be positive. Around that, then the understanding the effect of emotional transfer between people. That person A can affect the emotions of person B. If you're calm and someone's a bit anxious, you might be able to transfer some of that calmness to them. That's a really important point to be aware of, that our emotions are social and we can transmit them between each other. And as we are moving forwards with our interaction discussion with athletes and with other people who might be affecting those athletes, is that how does emotional contagion transmission take place in terms of promoting the positive mood states that you want, or reducing the negative ones that you're trying to avoid. So that brings us kind of to the start point of all of this in terms of is to then, okay, we need to find a way of working. There's not a lot of research immediately about pandemics. We turn to existing theory, and which brought me in, I think, in terms of looking at emotion regulation, being proactive, and then some of the work with green exercise as the starting point. So we know we're going to get emotional responses. What are emotional responses? What do they do? Emotions are, in essence, feelings that are responses to specific situations. Those feelings have a physiological component. They have an action tendency. So if you're anxious because you're worried about going into the supermarket, you're anxious about going for a run, that will lead to some appraisal of that, some thoughts about that. That could then lead to what actions you're going to do. If anxiety prompts you to wipe down your hands more often, that's a good thing. A lack of anxiety around the a lack of anxiety around the virus, certainly in the early days, could have been problematic, and certainly the idea of the UK going into lockdown was seemingly partly based on the fact that there wouldn't be the appetite to hold this for that long, and in other words, people would get bored from social distancing. Well, the re-injection of anxiety, I don't want to catch this, is actually quite a useful reminder of that. This is important. But emotions are a powerful thing. We've seen them in sport and how they enact on people's performance. We've seen them in sport, how people, when they're very nervous, can wish to withdraw from doing things. We know that people can reappraise their emotions so that they can be functional or dysfunctional. And with sports psychologists, we're pretty good at working with people's emotions and how the narration that goes around them and the images that connected to them can be altered and made positive. So if emotion is one of the major consequences of COVID-19, then maybe we've got a route into being quite helpful with not just our athletes, with other people, and also if emotion regulation strategies and helping people aware of their emotions, these new emotions that are coming in different situations, and teaching them encouraging them to use the strategies they've got, fine-tuning them so that they're much better than what they were, and they can apply them across different contexts. Again, that's a really useful thing for us to do. What we all should be aware of that, and what unpleasant emotions can lead to, is serious mental health issues, and we've got to be on the guard for all of that. The suicide, self-harm is extremely problematic. Alcohol use in the COVID-19. The house pub is open, regularly comes firing across. Our emotions are indicators into these things as they can get much more serious, and I think that is a key point that we should be aware of. What is emotion regulation? There are many models of emotion regulation. In essence, it's about the awareness of how you're feeling, and then it's the picking of a strategy to actually increase the intensity of, say, pleasant emotions, to feel happier, feel more excited, more energetic, to reduce the intensity of unpleasant emotions, feel less fearful, less angry, not so anxious. A load of strategies. It can be focused on yourself. You can get yourself more energetic, or it could be focused on someone else. You want them to be more energetic. You want them to be less anxious. We also know that if you are feeling, if you're not feeling that energetic, and you want to feel more energetic, encouraging someone else to feel more energetic, in other words, increasing changing their emotional state, which can have a knock-on effect of improving the general mood of those around you, can actually be quite beneficial. So you can sometimes use changing the emotion of others to improve your own emotional state. And certainly, the idea that the life and soul of the party type person, gives that some sort of popular way of thinking about it, or the miserable person that brings the whole mood down. But he's presenting at the moment, of course, isn't he? Yeah, online jokes don't go well. Well, I don't see applause on the side. The key point emotion can transfer between people is very clearly illustrated in that part there. So the next key part is that emotion regulation can be deliberate and automatic. Now, the various different models for this we'll look at, but the cognitive, the reappraisal of the cause, which is Gross and Thompson's work, again, very useful. Behavioural. We can do lots of the cognitive one because we're all enclosed in environments. We're enclosed in our houses, so we have opportunity for that reappraisal, that cognitive change. Behavioural, and less so, because call and talking to someone, yes, but you need to make that contact online. Exercise, the prioritizing of exercise was a fantastic thing within the lockdown, and connecting that as a mood regulation, emotion regulation strategy is very useful, not just now but thereafter. Relaxation, music, and food as popular emotion regulation strategies. Well, many people talk during this crisis that their exercise level's gone up. They go out for walks, they train a bit harder, and they're also their exercise in terms of the speed in which they got to the fridge has gone up. In other words, that people, the idea of using food as an emotion regulation strategy is something we do, but it is something we need to do with some caution, because it can have a serious dysfunctional part to, and same with to your well-being. And then the nature and the environment, we'll unpack this in a bit more in terms of how the nature environment could be used in order to promote positive moods. Key point is that emotion regulation can be effortful, and certainly what I found in the early days working with the athletes as it's unfolded is that going outside was quite an emotional event, and the differences, responses to people was, and the emotion regulation that people had to do was making them feel tired. And a lot of people said, well, I've been on runs, I've done exercise, I do a lot of work with runners, and so I'm going slower. Why could that be? Well, if you are regulating emotions you're not used to within that context, then it's likely to have an effect on your fatigue. It's a bit, if there's a central pot of energy within a one person, then regulating your emotion is detracting from that. It doesn't mean you're running out of energy, but if you want to access your inner energy, you might have to do some psychological strategies to psych yourself up to be able to do so. So the mental preparation going out before exercising in the current climate might be necessary if you're finding that exhausting, but also at the same time recognizing it's more effort, and therefore not being so harsh on yourself about what you do and don't do. Automatic emotion regulation strategies are very important. They're things we automatically do without really making any conscious thought. Many of them could be disabled during lockdown. The idea, in Britain, the idea of the pub is a social event people go to relax. People will go to cinemas, and people will go for coffees, and people will go for walks. Some of those they can do far more easily than others. And many of the things that people would do automatically without realizing that they actually had an effect on their mood. And once they're stopped, you could find yourself in a relatively unhappy mood without that clear antecedent, a clear reason why it came about. So proactive planning, managing the mind and body, is very, very useful. And therefore plan exercise, plan diet, plan downtime, and importantly, source expert help. Be mindful about what you expose yourself to. And going back to the clear lines of communication, it's really important, and to be acting on information that's quite useful. So in early stages as a practitioner, the BPS, British Psychological Society, put a nice resource of articles which people had written to help practitioners, quite useful, open access, freely available. The Lancet starts collecting articles, again, really useful. I mean, there's a massive research that has since developed. Early stages, it helps to be able to informing yourself where this is going on. But the planning, the proactivity, the what can I do now, make use of this moment. And in many senses, this is a fantastic opportunity to not have to drive to work, to not have to travel anywhere, to make use of time. I know from my own experiences, I save two hours a day from not being in the car, and I use those 2 hours a day. And the planning of exercise, the giving yourself challenges. What I've been doing is quite comical, is that as we went into lockdown, I did one chin-up for every day of lockdown. So first day I did one chin-up, and then the second day I did 2 chin-ups, the third day 3, and today I did 61. So we break those down into units. We put a funny film, and I do funny impressions. They're all planned. I think they're funny. We planned that they're on YouTube. You can plan that, and it gives you something to focus on. You're proactive. You're giving you something to look forward to. You're not being reactive and so I'm waiting for the opportunities to be delivered by someone else. The things under your control. That's the theme that will keep coming back to as we talk about the strategies we can bring in. to help people through this crisis. Planning diet. You have to now, because it's very hard to get your shopping. Planning diet in the early stages meant that your normal routines were changed. You had to distance yourself in the supermarket. You had to plan. You couldn't buy what you wanted to necessarily. And you can think that through. You aren't hoarding it, but it's planning it. And we know, again, some of the work that will come on later is that you help your immunity by having a good, healthy diet. You help your immunity by being exercise. Planning your diet downtime allows you not to be at work on the whole day. So some of the theories that come into this that are usable, applicable. Gross's model of emotion regulation, really quite useful, because it breaks it down to different, in essence, families, situation selection being one. You change your situation for where you want to go. It's much harder now. We're all living in houses where we might have people that we argue with. Not my house, of course, but previously you could get yourself in, go to somewhere different. You were changing your environment all of the time. There's part of a choice. You're selecting different situations. That choice has somewhat been taken away. People now joke they're going for their weekend away in the Costa del Garden, for example, which the nature of humour is to joke that you're going to go to somewhere and cheer yourself up. So your options around that are somewhat limited, but you can think them through. The idea of going to Costa del Garden is a joke, but the idea that your exercise becomes a really good situation selection change. That your exercise is a really important part of your mood management across this crisis. Your exercise in this case doesn't always have to be about training. It could be about getting out and feeling quite good. Prior to prior to this, I would always go for a run in the mornings. And the idea, as we're going through winter, the mood enhancing effect of going for a run, being outside, and I would push going into nature, although I run around parks, is mood enhancing to be running while the sun rises. It's mood enhancing to be out while the sun rises if you can't go running. It's very, very early. You have to get up now as the sun rises, so we weren't doing that. But you get the point that you change your situation as a mood regulation strategy, and it's not training. And whereas many athletes see when they go to exercise as training, then the split to that is one of the situation selections is to exercise as a strategy, an intentional strategy for changing your mood. It doesn't have to be hard exercise. It can be enjoyable exercise, and picking an environment where you can actually exercise without the stresses that go around you. Now, that might, if the stresses are other people, then you want to restrict that. And it's then looking through, what can I control? What can I change in order to be able to get to that state of being happy where you're exercising. The options can be exercising on your own at home in your own space. If that's safe, then that's good, because you will feel comfortable within that, confident that you won't be exposing yourself to the virus. That inner confidence that you are keeping yourself healthy, being positive in terms of keeping fitness, but actually knowing that you are secure is important. Others then become changing how your thoughts, what you're focusing on, right the way to the other extreme of response modulation, which is all about once the emotion has exposed it, as it become intense, engaging in strategies to intentionally reduce the intensity of those emotions, such as the psychological skills we would teach them, progressive muscular relaxation, those type of things. Within that middle part, which we'll come back to, are a whole range of psychological skills. When we look at psychological emotion regulation strategies, there are hundreds, over 400, there are hundreds. And when people become aware of what they use, you get a sense of just how many there are. Many of our sports psychological interventions also can act as emotion regulation strategies, and awareness of that repertoire can be highly important. So the idea that goal setting can increase and can generate a sense of anxiety, but it can also a sense of achievement. Imagery can be used to see yourself doing through difficult tasks, but can see yourself through overcoming some of the issues about internalizing behaviors that reduce the likelihood of catching the virus. So, I mean, touching face was one of the strategies that you try to reduce the amount of, as is washing hands. You can start making intentional plans around how you would minimize and become conscious of when you would be wanting to touch your face. Imagery scenarios can be placed to actually see yourself doing things differently. Self-talk strategies can be set to talk yourself out from touching your face. Emotion can be connected to that, as the risk of going through those acts increase the chance of you getting the emotion, of getting it, and therefore you take it more seriously. You can but what a great opportunity in many senses to start using your psychological skills that you might have learned for sport across other areas of your life to keep yourself healthy in an age when it's uncertain. That the inner confidence to be able to act in a way that reduces the likelihood that you'll get this virus, and if you don't get the virus, you're less likely to pass it on to the people who your friends and loved ones, then they don't get the virus. So that's a good thing, and it's integrating that into practice. So there's various steps which I think we can go through to get to this point. One of them is assessment. What strategies do you use and make you feel better? And you can focus that on both what you use to make you feel better and make others feel better. And the idea, so you reflect. That's about some degree of reflection. What am I doing? When do I feel very positive? What was I doing before that in order to get to that state? And just writing them down. Start off by writing them down, not being overly complicated and about whether they worked or not, but identification of what they were. Because the more you do that, the more likely you'll find that you'll see the strategies that are common to you that you actually use. And what you will do, and we'll come to this in a moment, is you'll start fleshing out some of the non-conscious ones that you might have been relying on that are gone, and you've got to be aware of them in order to put them back in. Then you want to looking at how your emotions affect others, and how you could get better at improving the mood of others, particularly online, and whether speaking more to people is actually what they want, or sometimes letting them speak and just being available to listen and start working out ways of being effective. Do you pick up emotions of others, or do you influence others' emotions, or they influence yours? Kind of where are you at in that relationship in terms of do you pick up the moods of others, or do you find yourself influencing? And becoming aware of that will be quite useful, because it will give you an insight into whether you need to develop strategies to protect yourself from picking up bad moods, which might well be then situation selection, change where you go, or change what you're thinking about when you are aware that this is going to really seriously make your mood negative. Because sometimes you'll have friends, family, who will have watched some terrible information on the news and catastrophize about that. And when we start catastrophizing about it and start feeling that this is the end, the end is coming, it's like being in the joke, well, not a joke, but it felt like being in The Walking Dead at the early start as a society started closing down. It shouldn't feel like that. We should be able to keep ourselves relatively isolated. We should be able to find some space to exercise. That is much harder for some groups than others, but we've got to challenge around our environment where we can do that, and how we can make the best of what we've got. And from that, it then becomes possible. Having identified strategies that you use, what are you doing well that you should do more of? And that's quite useful, because it you start identifying your own internal way of working. That means you can do more. You can do more of those. You want to do more of those. That isn't to say that doing more of them will necessarily be useful, because you might then want to look at, if you're constantly repeating emotion regulation strategies, it might be that that isn't functional, because really you might need to go to the root cause of it to stop the emotion occurring in the first place. But if it works, that's a plaster to put on the gaping wound. Really, you might want to work a way of not getting yourself cut in the first place. And repeated use of more, I've heard this in practitioners I've helped with, and is that more use of psychological skills isn't necessarily better, but effective use of them when they're required is what's required. And it might well be that you are having to use psychological strategies a lot because you're putting yourself into situations which cause you to have to use them. The prevention of having to use them would be to change what situations you're putting yourself into, if that's possible, or to change what you think about that situation, so you act differently within it, and which might well be about what strategies are not working. Do you need to stop? And catastrophizing is one of those strategies that people get into. Being a victim is one that people get into. A victim. I mean, going into this, we did some work with Rosie Stantz, who's an explorer, and her explorations to the North and South Pole and the qualitative work she, especially a diary of what went on, and you get the intense emotions of situations which is life-threatening, and then the attentional control that said, well, actually, I've now got to take my gloves off. I've got very little time to get the heater working, but without taking my gloves off, I'm not going to be able to do this. So I have to really concentrate on what you're doing, and that it's different, but it says that there is a crisis, there's a real threat, but in order to deal with that threat, I need to concentrate, and by doing X, I actually overcome the problem to actually do so. And the lessons learned is that sometimes we are exposed to intense emotions, sometimes we have to deal with them directly, other times we wouldn't have to do so. So you record your own emotion regulation strategies, and I think that's as simple as writing them down. And it's as simple as a daily diary of emotions. And there's two reasons why that would be useful. One is it will help you identify how you're feeling and what strategies you're using to redress those. But secondly, expressive writing your emotions down, is also a useful strategy in itself, in that what you start doing non-consciously is your brain makes sense of and puts an order to the experiences you're feeling, and that makes you feel quite good that you've got them out. And just that expressive writing as a simple strategy is a starting point, but it's also a starting point to some of the work I'm talking about. Then you start putting it into practice. So the actions you want to go around, you identify the goal. So I'm in this crisis now, so I need a goal. My goal might be to exercise for an hour a day and come out quite happy. What do I need to be able to do to that? I need to be able to run in a space where I haven't got people around me, and that's quite good. How do I get to that? And what do I do to that? It might be relatively straightforward if you live somewhere quite rural. I'm quite lucky where I am, although I don't go out much. The other part of that is to exercise where there are anyone else's, and so it might be in your room you exercise, and you don't need actually that much. You don't need that much space in order to be able to exercise. Initially, that will feel so self-conscious that you're exercising in a place where you normally go to bed and so on. But after a time, that self-consciousness will reduce. This feels wrong sets of thoughts and emotions that come with that then get replaced by this is serving a really important goal for me to feel happier and feel contented with myself, and therefore that's really quite useful to be experiencing. Around that, I've just seen one of the functions on the side of this, the software. So I was just daydreaming. So identify a process goal. What do I need to do in order to get me to the outcome goal I want to do around this new environment where things think and feel different? Then the cue words around that help you going to do that. And So in essence, you've got this new way of training, which might be, and you're taking your psychological skills and you're integrating that so that you're using those in a way that reduces the self-awareness initially of training in this different environment. So so it then becomes positive. Imaging yourself to do these things, again, quite useful. But seeing yourself performing in this different environment and normalizing it in terms of this is how it's going to work, all becomes effective ways of training. And from training, it can become quite good. And from it feeling quite good, you then start feeling positive about it. Recording it's quite useful. Take the behavioural model about reflection that Michi talked about, or I talked about it, I talked about it, but she wrote it, it's hers, not mine, is that you need to have the reflective part to have the motivation to keep these things going. So recording your work's quite useful, recording your psychological states, your inner states, what you did, being aware of your self-talk scripts, which might catch you catastrophizing about the virus and its effects, and the catastrophizing about your sporting opportunities lost. They are things you can't control, and therefore you probably wish to avoid them. What is in your control? What can you train for? And all those things then become positive ways in order to make use of your previous experience to inform on your future performance and future mental health. And I didn't just put I don't know where it is, but I'll find them. Liam Neeson and his keys. But that wasn't a very good impression of Liam Neeson. Great film. But it's then being aware of the non-conscious strategies. And the reason why Liam Neeson was very good in that film at finding his daughter. In the same way, we have unconscious strategies. We need to find out what they are. We need to find out what they are. And the act of recording them is a way to identify them. That's of what you've done in the diary will help you identify those non-conscious strategies. So then you can identify them. From identifying them, you'll be able to consider whether you're going to use them or not. One of those is nature and mental health, and the work Tig McIntyre's group, great to work with Tig, so makes it socially quite nice, makes them always very welcoming, and the intervention seemingly so obvious in that mental health, people's mood, well-being responds to nature, and is a deliberate intervention. It feels a little bit too obvious. You need to change your mood, or why don't you go and stand somewhere nice, or and you go, yeah, that's great. That's what people do. Naturally, they do that, and the software around exercise equipment has started putting nature into the pictures you're looking at. Zwift, riding the outdoors. All the gym I went to go to, suddenly ride outdoors. Interestingly, we've been at the run in New Zealand along Wellington Harbour. Is pretty good close resemblance of it. But nature has a restoration effect. Nature's on a good mood. How can we make use of that? So with that group, Tig, Noel, and others, we did 6 strategies to promote athlete well-being, and we put them out. And I was going to talk through some of them now because they kind of connected together. The journey that got us there was my previous thought. This then connected it together. So connect. In absolute, and Tig thought of the acronym, he's great on those as well, is create social contacts. Keep those social contacts up and running. I said and I know from my own experience, I'm speaking more to my family than previously, not the family I live with, because I see them all the time, but my wider family, as we connect with each other about how we're getting on with the virus and so on and so forth. But it then becomes deliberate. This is where previously this would be an automatic emotion regulation strategy, not used that often. Now it becomes a conscious one you deliberately and intentionally go to use to try and ensure that everyone's okay and everyone's in coping, and the ways in which you can help people okay, to speak to them, but also if need be, help them practically if need be, if that's possible. I don't know about everyone else, but our neighbours very early on in the crisis connected to the idea that if someone gets stuck, the others would go shopping for them, and so on. That social contact, that feeling of belongingness is really important. All goes online. The potential risks, of course, is you expose yourself to negative emotional responses. The going on the news in the early days, far more was a bombardment of deaths and negative information. It still is to a large degree, but I think we've learned to cope with it far better. But there are some risks to that. The outdoors, training outdoors, for example, is really useful. If you if you can put a bike trainer on a balcony, that's better than putting your bike trainer in the house. I drag my exercise bike and rowing machine. I've got two. My wife, we do them together in the garden. I drag them into the garden, and it's which is good. My neighbours put their heads over the fence to hear the heavy breathing. They're just checking I'm exercising, not just being a heavy breather, I think. But you train outside. With this massive, great shame about this pandemic in terms of that was we've gone into spring. Spring is such a mood-enhancing month. The days get longer. We can't take the full advantage of the sunshine and being outside as we should. So we have to consciously try to do that far better. But there are ways of doing it if you haven't got it. If you haven't got direct access to that, some nice evidence around savouring, getting images of nature around you, to actually look at them, and that looking at them beforehand, savouring when you're out in nature is associated with improving mood and having lasting effects, that people feel better for longer. I know on reading that literature, I turned Lane Towers into a host of an art gallery of pictures from around of our travels, of sunsets and trips to New Zealand and beautiful hills, or to fill the walls up full of positive environments and from previously positive experiences, to simply try and energize that nature is all around you and all around and in the house that you're living with. And you can. It's a very simple strategy. Seemingly doesn't seem to work. You put positive pictures of nature around you, and then there's the opportunity that has a positive effect on your mood. Certainly, getting out into nature, you just need to get outside the act. You don't have to do anything. You just have to get yourself into nature as a strategy to try and make yourself feel better. Visualize, review your season, review your goals. Now, the goals at the moment, the short-term goals, are somewhat problematic. That when will people be taking part in the competitions again? When the Olympics is supposed to happen next year, will it happen next year? We don't really know about that. We assume it will be. We assume the virus is going on, but we don't really know. And that, so reflect on that. What goals are under your control? Reflect it, so that you can focus on something that you can actually can do. I've just noticed the time, by the way. I've been waffling on a bit. I wanted to have more time for questions, but I'll just carry on and stop waffling again. Being aware of your mood. There's nice online mood measures which you can check in the mood, which is our mood measure, the Brunel mood scale, which you can click into to get an immediate bit of feedback on your mood. Very useful. You don't necessarily need that. You can write down how you're feeling, but this is a way of getting a standardized measure. You can use your emotions to help guide safe behaviors. What emotions would do is they serve as a reminder when things are important to us. They serve as a reminder when we're in danger, and that can help keep you safe. Great opportunity to discover new knowledge, and that when we're at home, if you are not working full on, I know and academics are, we've taken to online meetings with such enthusiasm. And knowing that we don't have to travel, we can have them back to back. But for many, there is, I say that jokingly, but there is an opportunity to actually, you're not traveling on the buses, you're not traveling in the car, you're not driving as much. There's an opportunity to upskill. This is a chance to try and say, well, actually, what can I do that I've been putting off for ages and ages and ages? What do I now have some time for? Do I want to learn about mindfulness, build my resilience? There are apps that can help you go through that. And it can be a self-learning experience that people can go on and get a sense of achievement. Great one is about recovering, about relaxing. And I post that BASIS fellow Greg White, professor, of course, put on about bulletproof your immunity. And the idea that exercising is really good. Exercising is good for training. Exercising is also really good for your immune system. Don't drink too much alcohol. The idea that the house pub opens and the pub alcohol is an emotion regulation strategy. If you're using it in that sense, be conscious that you're using it in that sense. And they actually said, well, maybe I shouldn't be using it so much. Maybe there are other emotion regulation strategies that I could replace that with on more often than I am doing, and because it has an additional function for improving your physical health. Bulletproof your immunity, great phrase to do so with. And actively setting that as a goal. Monitor your sleep if need be, but certainly in the tendency when we are now, maybe the opportunity to train more, avoid overtraining too much, the potential to work more, get balance around that. The planning your downtime becomes critically important, and how you're going to do that, and find different ways of doing that. We have a phone call to our cousins, loads of cousins, each Sunday as an example. You plan that downtime. We never meet. In reality, we do meet online. It's really not quite nice, and you look forward to it. And, key part is emerging sources of expertise. Without the idea that we should all be drinking bleach, that kind of thing, which we sometimes hear, probably want to leave that alone. We probably want to stick to some proper evidence and well-connected bits of information. Some nice work about controlling the controllables, which came out from Mark Smith and Neve Fitzpatrick. So the next steps, this is where I see we're going with this, is you want a high self-confidence in your actions to keep safe. Right? Your capability, your motivation, your opportunity, you think through all of those, you use psychological skills so that your capability is high. Use psychological skills so that you can see yourself performing in those different environments, so you see the physical opportunity. Reflect on previous performances so you give yourself motivation. See the positivity that's going on in this. Working from home, reducing travel gives opportunities to do different things that might be quite useful around that. I have done parkrun every day, every Saturday for the last 8 years. I'm denied of parkrun, but I've taken that opportunity to do a lot of work around strengthening my knee, which is me being an unmentionable age, that was holding me back. I'm now very positive that my knee is a miles better state than it was before. Positive changes around where you are to bring yourself into somewhere quite useful. Plan social times, make the most of nature, use savouring where you haven't got immediate nature around you, imagery, self-talk, make the environment in your head quite a positive one and realistic, and control the controllables. We need patience in this. We need patience. This might go on for a while. each day is an opportunity to have a good day. So I see it. Each moment as an opportunity, and keep it in the here and now. Largely keep it under control. Dreaming of when you're going to be going back to where it was before is good to some degree. When that would be can create a sense of uncertainty that might just make you feeling a bit negative. So I've gone on. In conclusion, major challenge. Active strategies are useful. Learn to use the strategies and evaluate how well you use them, and be aware of the emotions of others and yourself, and improving your own. Right, the one I've got is cheers loudly, way like that. Now, I'm trying to find the questions and tipping on. There will be questions in here, and we can hopefully have a chat around that. And I've got to just hit the right button, chat, and the displays in the room. Let's just go to the chat. Oh, there we are. I've seen it. Yes, Paula, I absolutely agree. I'm a park run victim. I've replaced it with chin ups. Lloyd, faster paced runs. Really.
Hi, Andy. There's a couple of questions that popped up. Cassie was asking, hi, is it possible to share the link to access the Hayley Carruthers reflection on what that was mentioned?
Do we get these slides afterwards?
We are uploading the recorded version of this webinar onto the members area in the BASES website. Okay. So yeah.
Okay. Right. The Hayley's video. Hayley's video. What I'll do is I'll retweet that on Twitter. Copy BASES in, and copy Hayley in.
Fantastic. That'd be great. There was a couple of other questions as well. Lloyd asked, do you have any tips with regards to being able to appreciate nature whilst on a faster paced, high intensity run?
That's going to be difficult, Lloyd, because what happens is, you've got me on, this is one of my, is that as you run quicker, physiological sensations dominate your thoughts, and therefore it's really, really quite hard. What I would suggest is that if you want to appreciate nature, you do intervals. So you run hard and then in the rest recovery part, you have a good look around you. Take a deep breath, relaxing, stretching, looking into the sun. And at that part, the recovery is absolutely possible, and nature is really quite fantastic in setting that up. And I think one of the beautiful parts of nature and exercise is when it's quite warm and that you're doing intervals which are quite short duration. You have quite a long recovery, and you can sit and stretch in the sun, in the environment, or walking. And I think that's the way to go for it.
There was another question, Andy, from CS. They said, great talk. Can we use yoga nidra as a tool?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, yoga is a method of changing your thoughts, bringing you into the present. It's got great physical. Yes, absolutely.
I think that was all the questions so far, unless anybody else, any questions on the chat. That was all I'd flagged up as we went along.
Okie dokie. We are. Richard Thirlwell. Well, you see, Richard Thirlwell has made a point. He said, you've not mentioned all your life stories. And I said, I've not always been a psychologist, Rich. Before I was a psychologist, I was a dancer. In fact, I was a tap dancer, but I had to stop because I kept falling in the sink. Richard Thirlwell has heard that joke for the last 20 years, probably each year. He's heard that, and I think he's missing me. He's missing me. So, Rich, I thought I'd get that in. I apologise for not enough jokes. Not enough jokes. More chin-ups. Have you seen the chin-ups? It's 61 today, 62 tomorrow. Love it. The chin-up bar's been outside my house for years and years and years. Never really used it, and then we're in lockdown. I thought, well, actually, I'll tidy the side of my house up and all. Got a skip, and then it's one chin-up for each day. And the First week was all right. The first week was after that it's hard, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, Claire.
Well, I think that's all the questions that we've got so far. So thank you very much, Andy. That was brilliant.
Right, good. Thank you, everybody. It's still Thursday. I'm off to do some rowing in the garden.
Fantastic. And if anybody wants to watch the webinar from the start, we will be uploading it onto the bases website in the members area as soon as we can, which may be sort of a week or so.
Yeah.
Watch out for it there. Thank you very much, Andy.
Okay.
It was great.
Right, brilliant. Okay, cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Bye.